Peak Human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
Peak 人間
Pitówka niewiód.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I hope you're starting back at episode 1. I'm Brian Sanders. This is the Peak Human podcast. I'm the creator of the Food Lies film, which is being worked on daily. We're just getting deep into our Africa footage. We have our East Coast film tour, which is the last film tour, scheduled and ready to go. And we have our special event. For anyone on the East Coast, please come to this amazing event. We have Dr. Bill Schindler, we have Dr. Kate Shanahan, and we have Dr. Brianna Pobner, all great guests of the Peak Human show. All will be there live to do presentations, to hang out, to eat dinner. We have an exquisite 6-course meal spanning 3.5 million years of human history that we'll be eating with the select group of people that make it out with us. The Eastern Shore Food Lab is putting it on, which Dr. Bill Schindler runs. We are going to go through each epoch of human evolution and learn about their diet and eat what they ate. And it's all butchered by Bill and his students. All kinds of amazing sides, fermented beverages, alcoholic pairings representing each era as well. Really special meal and a really special group of people. It will be at the Eastern Shore Food Lab. You can get tickets at eatlikeahuman.com. That's Bill and his wife's site, eatlikeahuman.com, and you'll see the link there for Journey Through Our Dietary Past, an evolutionary dining experience. So excited about this. We'll be interviewing Bill, Brianna, and Kate over this weekend as our last bits of the Food Lies film, and we thought we could just bring everyone together for an amazing event while we're at it. So go get your tickets now, be a part of this. It's on April 17th, that's Saturday, 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. in Chestertown, Maryland, where the Eastern Shore Food Lab is. And know that the event might already be sold out by the time you're hearing this, so please know there's a live streaming version. It's going to be really great. Christina Schindler is going to walk around and get in on all the action. It's going to be like you're right there with us. You're going to see all the presentations, and you'll also get the high quality edit after the event of all 3 presentations sent straight to you. All right, got carried away there. Need to talk about this episode with Marty Kendall, my man, my nutrient density brother from another mother, as he says. He had me on his show recently, and we connected a lot about nutrient density. We're great pals with Dr. Ted Naiman as well. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. We talk about satiety, nutrient density, of course, oxidative priority, nutrient optimization, how you can include plant foods in your diet without getting tons of anti-nutrients, the crazy story of Eat Like the Animals and the researchers who changed their data and threw out some data that made it look like protein was killing you when it's not. Of course, it's a long story. You need to listen to this episode to know what I'm talking about. We talk about basal insulin. We talk about longevity. We talk about the nutrient leverage hypothesis, which I think is better than the protein leverage hypothesis because it includes even more necessary things your body needs. So I don't need to pitch this episode any longer. But before we start, I'll just make sure everyone knows about Nose-A-Tail. That's nose-a-tail.org. You can make boxes of meat, seasonings, biltong, which is a jerky-like snack, skin food, soap, body care, hats, all of the great products. You can get them in a box sent to you. We have free shipping options. We have special products like organ meat mixed in with ground beef. We have the low omega-6 chicken and pork. Please check it all out. Nose-A-tail.org. I'm very proud of this stuff. It's supporting this show. It's all I do. I don't take any outside sponsors. Also, sapien.org for the program. If you want to make a big change in your life, we got your back. Health coaching, videos, the whole thing. Special price. And the tribe, the Sapien Tribe, where you get to be part of our community and be part of our Zoom calls with Dr. Gary and I and get the extended show notes and have access to the extra videos and our private website for the members. So sapien.org for all of that, nose-a-tail.org for the meats, and cowsforkids.com, which is our organization to benefit the tribes in Africa that we visited. Our Indiegogo page is still going. It's going strong. Support the cause now. All right, let's get on to the show with Marty Kendall. All right, Marty Kendall's back for round 2. How's it going?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Scared. You've got a whole pile of really interesting topics to talk through. 3 years of really deep delving into one podcast. It should be great.
Well, let's do it.
Let's
I
do
love
it.
the first one. We got into some of the same topics, so I'll encourage everyone to go back, listen to our first one, which was in 2018. Quite a while ago, we talked about satiety and nutrient density and some of the same things. But today, we're going deeper. You've had some amazing articles that have come out since.
Tuesday.
They're kind of like short books, but they're in a blog format.
I finally did write
a lot
a
of
book.
great.
Yeah.
You put it together, all these blog posts into a book and even more. So you've been doing amazing things. You're sort of what do you even call yourself? Just a nutrient optimizer, I guess.
Whatever you want, mate.
Okay, well, just to let people know, you're in Australia. You are what do you like? What is your occupation? What is your skill set?
By day, I'm an engineer. Married to Monica, who's type 1 diabetic, and started delving down the rabbit hole of nutrition to try and optimize her blood sugars and insulin, and then realized that low insulin foods that stabilize blood sugars and keep blood sugars really stable are really nutrient poor. So I thought, okay, we can use a multi-criteria analysis to bring that together, and then realized satiety was another factor. So that's been my latest thing, and trying to bring them all together to optimize nutrition for different goals. So basically, nutrient optimizer, optimizing nutrition is my jam in my spare time, and have a whole lot of fun doing it. And I just love it when people like you get it, and I love talking about it.
Oh, I love it. I'm obsessed with it. I have a few people that I think have really put it together, and we kind of made our little club. I had like Ted Naiman. It's like Ted and Marty are great pals.
Yeah.
I just watched a video you guys did. You guys did a little podcast. It was great. And we're all kind of coming at it from different angles and have come to the same conclusion. And we're fed off each other. We definitely love to use each other's ideas and work and collaborate.
Definitely. Yeah, it's been a great little community of people with like minds to just bounce off, and it's just been a really indulgent to have access to people like Ted and Rob Wolf and Mike Julian and Lewis from Ketogenics, and just to be able to work together to build a better picture from, everybody said, the old way of standard Western diet is garbage, and the nutritional guidelines are junk, and then swung to keto, and then from paleo and low carb, and then it's like, how do we refine that? Because obviously people weren't getting the perfect results from that. So how do we dial it in to tailor it for different goals? So that's been sort of the quest over the last 4 or 5 years to quantify it and optimize it. And once you use data to cut through the noise, you're home free and you shake off the dogma.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I was going to say, is there's this evolving crew of people that don't want to be stuck in a dietary camp. And there are these trends, and it's like first it's paleo, then it's keto, then it's carnivore, and then what's next? And I'm trying to stay out of all of that and just be like, well, what works? What's the data show? I think that's why these engineers, Ted's was a mechanical engineer before he's a doctor. There's other guys like Ivor Cummins and Dave Feldman and lots of engineers. So let's dive in though, because you've done a lot of great work. You put together a lot of data, right? So your site is called Optimizing Nutrition. And you have a group of people that have been going through programs and tracking foods and all this type of stuff. And it's been amazing to see all the data. And you also you got some data from another source, from like My Nutrition Pal or something like that.
MyFitnessPal, with 500,000 days of MyFitnessPal to look at the relationship between how much people eat and the different macros. And then from the people using Nutrient Optimizer in our masterclass, we've been able to look at not just protein leverage, but like you called it, nutrient leverage. It's not just getting enough protein, it's about getting all the micronutrients, and as you get adequate, your body just settles down and says, I'm happy, and gets on with life.
Yeah, I'm trying to coin this nutrient leverage. I don't know if people, it's basically what you've been talking about for a long time. But protein is a nutrient. And for the film, we're working on this part of the film right now about really trying to make it visual and easy to understand. And it's like nutrients versus energy. Nutrients are proteins, vitamins, and minerals. and energy is fat and carbs.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of tug of war between nutrients and energy, and it's pretty simple. But to start off the discussion, we need to talk about protein leverage.
Yeah.
And maybe you just talk about the protein leverage hypothesis, because this is getting interesting, because your blog article kind of exposed some interesting things about the guys who came up with this theory.
Yeah. Professor Stephen Simpson and David Rabenheimer from the University of Sydney, and they've done some amazing work documenting the protein leverage hypothesis, basically saying that their book, Eat Like the Animals, was really fascinating because it sort of told the journey of how they came up with this theory by studying a whole massive range of different animals in nature and realized that everything eats until it gets enough protein, and then it stops. So if you've got foods that are a low percentage protein, you'll eat more, and if you've got higher percentage protein foods, you'll eat less. So this is their theory, and that it basically explains why everybody in the Western world overeats and binges on these nutrient poor foods, protein poor foods that are a combo of fat and carbs together with very low protein. So it's really the beautiful, simple hypothesis that explains everything. A lot of Ted's work, just pun intended, leverages off that, and it really works as people dial up to get adequate protein. And I suppose that's the question: what is adequate protein? The satiety kicks in, and they eat less, and they're not always consumed by hunger and wanting more food. So that's the guts of it. So yeah, I don't know where you want to take it from there.
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful theory that explains so much. And yes, Ted talks about this for years. And I finally read Eat Like the Animals a few months ago. And then I was like, oh, everything makes sense now. I get more what Ted's been knocking on about for so long. And just to kind of recap it or just reiterate, all mammals eat to a target of protein. And you have to get that amount of protein no matter what. So if your food supply is very poor, low protein, you're going to just eat more food. That's more energy and gain weight. And if your food supply has, if you either you give the animal a certain food supply, or I'm just talking about the food supply, like our modern food supply is so low protein that it makes sense why people are, if you choose an array of low protein foods, you're going to eat more of them to satisfy your body.
Yeah, and we don't really choose those low protein foods these days because our whole environment is optimized for profit and eating more. So, the foods that are cheapest, highest profit margin, easily available are these combo of starches, sugars, and refined seed oils that are smashed together with artificial colors and flavors to make them look and taste like they're nutrient dense, but they're not at all. So we just keep on eating them until we get obese, fat, and diabetic, and that's really at the cornerstone of all of our medical issues that we're facing at the moment. The diabetes epidemic, as we're all getting fatter and sicker, and it's a really scary prospect of what that's going to do to our, not just our Western economies, but about our whole world as this way of eating goes across the everywhere. And you would have seen that even in Africa. It's very hard to find anybody who isn't eating primarily a diet that consists of sugar, starch, and refined oil, just because it's so cheap to produce.
Yep. And as soon as those come in, the obesity and disease follow. And the group, the Hadza group, that was basically eating lean meat only, they didn't even have enough fat. I think they were the leanest people by far. So, I mean, and they had ample food. It's not like they were restricted on food. We were bringing them food. Tourists were bringing food. They've hunted whenever they want. They got animals. It wasn't like they were hungry. They were sharing with us. Take our food. It's fine. We'll get more. But anyway, so back to protein leverage. You mentioned in the article, and it's mentioned in the book, that there was an example of this woman. So they tested it in, was it crickets or grasshoppers from the very beginning?
Right?
It's either one, same thing. And they found that they ate to a certain level of protein, and if they changed the food, they ate more. Oh yeah, we can screen share. And what was interesting to me though is, now I lost my notes, is that a woman, Mary, when she went from 15% protein to 13%, she resulted in an increase of 290 calories per day. And then when you shifted, so you just go down a little bit in your protein to energy ratio and you ate a lot more. But when you go from 15% to 17%, it would drive a reduction of 150 calories per day. So it reduced the calories. So I know you've mentioned this, Ted's mentioned this, we'll probably mention the film. The amount of protein, the ratio, percentage of protein that we eat in the US went from, 15% back before we had obesity crisis to 12.5%. And that alone, if you kind of do this math based on all these different studies, that can account for the extra 250 whatever calories per day that would be needed to have an obese nation that we have.
It's such a simple, right? Clean hypothesis. I've got this screen share of, you mentioned the crickets, and it was really interesting in the Eat Like the Animals book. They talk about, these crickets are in search of food, but at the same time, they're all moving so fast together because they don't want to get eaten by a hungry cricket behind it who wants to eat it for protein. So they go cannibal if they can't find food just to get the protein they need because their buddies are high protein. But and I think that's probably a part of the discussion that we don't. This is a chart in here from the protein leverage hypothesis that basically shows from previous work that as people eat a higher percentage of protein, that they eat less. So this is a really nice graphic from Ted that's really clean that shows you eat donuts, you eat a whole lot more. If you eat steak, asparagus, and tomato, you're going to eat a whole lot less. But I think that's missed in the discussion. Most people are eating that 15, 12% protein or even less when it's all processed. But as you just climb that protein percentage a little bit, you'll eat less. And I think people have heard Ted say 40% protein, but I also understand what he means is you don't need to jump to 40, 50% protein overnight. You just need a little bit higher percentage than what you're getting at the moment. So I think that's an important discussion that needs to get out there, and that's part of the controversy with the Eat Like the Animals book as well.
Yeah, and that graph you showed, so people should watch the YouTube version of this, but it was kind of a heat map, and it was based on 160 studies, meta-analysis by Robbenheimer and Simpson. And yeah, I mean, it's the lowest intake ad libitum, like however much you want to eat was the highest protein, 50% protein, 40% fat, 10% carbs. And the highest energy intake where you would gain the most weight was 10% protein, 40% fat, 50% carb, which is basically the composition of a donut. So it's very clear that, it's about protein, and that's what Eat Like the Animals is about. And they had a lot of cognitive dissonance. You could tell that these guys, Robbenheimer and Simpson, had this cognitive dissonance because they said protein is so important. They made up the protein leverage hypothesis. Everything they wrote, protein's so good. It's great for kids, growing youth. It's great for pregnant women. It's great for the elderly. We know we need more protein as they age, but it's bad for you in your middle of your life. And they couldn't. I was wrestling. I could see them wrestling with that as I read the book.
Yeah. And you get to chapter 8, and all of a sudden they're talking about this mouse study that they took 1,000 mice and did this theoretical experiment where they fed them from very, very low protein to very, very high protein, like 5% to 60% protein in a range, and did this amazing. It's probably one of the most expensive nutritional studies ever done. Mind-blowing stuff. But and then when I started chatting with Ted about it, he sent me this link to some work that Rory Robertson had done to protest the study when he looked at the data and found that 143 of the mice had died due to malnutrition and failure to thrive before they reached adulthood. So they euthanized them and took them out of the data. So it's like, okay, what's going on here? The funny thing about the study was at the end, the hypothesis was that the conclusion was that a higher carb, lower protein diet was better for longevity. And then it had Sinclair on the author and a whole bunch of really high level authors that
It's David Sinclair, by the way, that's been, like on big podcasts talking about this stuff.
Yeah, which is, I don't know, as you said, it's hard to separate the cognitive dissonance of a plant-based diet is better, because that's what, I don't know, it's really hard to separate those two. And as you said, they've identified that protein leverage is number one, but then their biggest study of all of this work comes out with the conclusion and the advertisements that a lower protein diet is better for longevity. So it annoyed me and frustrated me. So I wrote a long article and dug into the data and analyzed it.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to check out that article. And can you share your screen again? You can see the name of the article, and we could go look at the part where you put those rats that they took out of the study, or the mice, back in. So once you put those mice that they euthanized, so it's basically they were on the low protein diet and they failure to thrive and they had disease and all these problems. And so they took them out of the study, but that kind of ruins the data because if you scroll down more.
And they came out with a low carb diet may make you unhealthy and shorten your life as the leading headline from these guys who were the gurus in protein leverage. So it's just like, how does that work? So this is the data that they removed that I dropped back in.
There it is.
And then
you passed it. Go up a little bit with the colored charts. So right here.
Yeah.
These are the ones in red that they took out. But when you put them back in, then the mice that lived longer were on higher protein.
Yeah, but it's basically noise. Like they've spent a lot of money on 1,000 mice in an amazing 3-year study, but the data is, with and without these data points, it's very noisy, although they've tried to simplify it with their nutritional geometry approach to show a conclusion that's all smoothed and nice. But when you look at humans in the real world, how do they live? How do they eat? Why do they die? We basically get to a certain point. We get weak, we get frail, we fall over, we break our hip, and don't never get out of the hospital system again, and are often dead within a year from that. So there's got to be that balance between being, if there is any validity to lower protein, higher carb providing longevity benefit, I think potentially it's overwhelmed by the fact that if you're frail, weak, and low muscle, you're much more likely to die of other causes compared to a mouse in a cage in a very non-real life environment. So you have to look at, how do we really live? How do we really die? And how do you want to be when you're 70 or 80? You don't want to be frail, weak, having someone else wipe your bum in a nursing home where you can't look after yourself.
Exactly. And I've had many great guests talk about this stuff before, like Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, talking about how important protein is as we age. Basically everyone I've talked to has echoed that it's very important as you age to keep protein. And here's the data you're scrolling through about, just protein for compared to lifespan. And it is a bit noisy too. Yeah. You could, like you're saying, but there's a U-shaped curve to everything, and that you don't want too much protein, or you don't want too much muscle, but you don't want not enough, right? Everything is kind of this U-shaped curve.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I think maybe there's if you're living on only 60% protein, if you're trying to live on protein powder and chicken breast and egg whites, that's all you had to live on, you'd probably struggle, and your body struggles to metabolize, to get ATP, to get energy out of that protein. And maybe it's more a metabolically intensive process at that point, and your body, that may not be optimal to be living on that. And it may not be optimal to be injecting insulin and eating 500 grams of protein a day to be a mass monster on stage, a bodybuilder. And I don't think that's metabolically healthy, but I think what we want to achieve is a healthy waist to height ratio, healthy blood sugar levels, a healthy HbA1c, lower insulin levels. And at that point, you've got the best chance of longevity. and living in the real world rather than trying to, fast for longer and avoiding protein. And at that point, you just waste away, become frail, your immune system crashes, and you're in all sorts of trouble.
Well, you want to look like Mark Sisson as you age, not like the Calorie Restriction Society.
Yeah.
I think you have this in this post. You have a image of these Calorie Restriction Society people that look like they're about to die or are already dead, and somehow they got a photo.
I'll bring that up. But the reality is very few people in the real world manage to restrict calories for the long term, just because we're surrounded by all this amazing junk food that we can't, if it's available, we can't say no to. So this is Roy Walford, who did the Biosphere Experiment, and I just think we over extrapolate the mice studies, because if you look at
that couple right there is a little scary too.
And these guys are the head of the Calorie Restriction Society, and not many people can actually maintain that for the long term. I definitely think it's beneficial to eat less overall, but yeah.
Well, you eat the right amount. We got this idea of calorie restriction from the monkeys. So they were eating, if you eat less processed food, then it can help you live longer, but not because they ate less calories, because they ate less junk. But if you're eating your natural diet, then you eat the appropriate amount. And you live the longest.
And we always extrapolate this data, and people get really excited about fasting and autophagy. But you're looking at yeast worms or mice, and 48 hours in a mouse is a day in a mouse is 40 days for a human. So if you're saying, well, I need to fast 48 hours in mouse days to get the benefits of autophagy, that's like 80 days for a human, and a good amount of people would be dead after that beneficial period of autophagy. So what you really need to do is achieve enough satiety and get adequate protein, adequate nutrients to optimize body composition to be strong, fit, fairly lean, and that will give you all the benefits of avoiding heart disease, cancer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. So I wanted to kind of debunk some of David Sinclair's ideas, but also just talk more about the protein leverage stuff and that specific study with the mice. I don't want to keep making you go back and forth. Oh, here you have these waist to height ratio. So the low protein and high carb diet that they claimed that would have the mice live the longest, that had them gain fat.
They had the worst body composition at that point as well.
So we know there's great studies showing that you don't live longer, you live shorter as you get heavier, or the bigger waist to height ratio or bigger BMI.
Yeah, the definite thing we do know is that being more obese leads to greater risk of cancer and diabetes and everything else that is a problem in our world. So the best way to give you the best odds of having a long, healthy life is to reach a waist to height ratio of around 0.5, at which point you'll avoid diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, at least have a better chance of doing that.
Yeah, and it's a pretty simple measurement that you can do at home. I mean, if you're 6 feet tall, that's 72 inches. So you just have, that's kind of a lot, 0.5, right? That's like 32 and a half. Or that's 36 inches. Wow. I mean, I'm like almost 5'11", and my waist is like 28 inches. So if you do the math, I have like a 0.4 something.
Yeah. Once you get to 0.5, your risk is optimized fairly well. And if you go lower, then it may be better, but you don't need to get to the point where you're starving, because as you said, there's a U-shaped curve to everything. If you're too lean, then you compromise your immunity and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah. So it's basically, it sounds like these two researchers, they took out those data, took out the mice that died, and then had this cognitive dissonance, and then came to this conclusion that low protein must be best when you're in middle age, which is just a really weird thing where it's good for you when you're young, good for you in your olds, but somehow it's bad for you. Did they ever try to explain why that would be?
Yeah, no, not really. And you've just got to have consistency across the data. You can't have a theory that applies to this certain subset of the population. That I don't think it's mischievous necessarily, but I think in nutrition communities, there's definitely a viewpoint that a plant-based diet is best. But what does plant-based mean? So often that's something that triggers me a lot. If you're eating, broccoli, asparagus, lettuce, spinach, you're going to be a lot healthier than if you're eating the opposite end of the extreme of the plant-based spectrum, which is the low satiety, low nutrient density, sugar, fat, starch, all combined together. I don't know if you want to. Got this really cool chart that I did. The most nutrient dense foods are like the watercress, endive, coriander, basil, those green leafy veggies, which have very few calories but provide a lot in terms of nutrients. There's a limit to how much of those you can actually eat. But down in the bottom corner, there's the nutrient poor.
You should share your screen.
Sorry.
It didn't share your screen. But yeah, while you're doing that, those are a lot of herbs.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like you're eating. So some people, we'll talk about anti-nutrients. Don't worry, audience. We'll talk about anti-nutrients. Some people, they're hardcore carnivores. Like, no green leafy. Yeah, I get it. I don't eat tons of spinach anymore either. Yeah. I went overboard on spinach and kale, and it wasn't great. So we're talking about watercress and endive and coriander and basil and arugula. I mean, these things you eat in small amounts. I mean, I ate a giant steak last night with some mushrooms and onions and some fresh cilantro. I just cut up, right? I'm just, I'm getting some little fresh cilantro. It's a little fresh flavor, little nutrients. It's all good. But yeah, keep going on this.
Yeah, I mean, and there's totally a limit to how much of these green leafy veggies you can have. Most people can't go more than 50, 100 grams of spinach will make a lot of people, rush to the toilet, and they won't do it again tomorrow because they just don't digest it so well. There's a point where you need to go, well, okay, I've got as much of the green leafies as I want to eat, and then you come down into the seafood and then the dairy and meat, which is a viable source of energy and nutrients together. So you get the protein, vitamins, minerals, and energy together, which you don't get from the green leafy veggies. So go your hardest with the green leafy veggies if you tolerate it, but there's a limit to that, and you need to get some calories from somewhere. So that the thing you really need to avoid are those really, really nutrient poor combos of foods that are the donuts, the sea crackers, even just refined oil by itself. It's not nutrient dense. It's not satiating. So I've got this.
There's nothing good for it.
Yeah,
it's everything. It's all the sad. It's a sad three. I keep talking about putting the film. The sad three is the sugar, flour, oil.
Yeah.
Where everything we eat, modern people, not people listening, eat is just those three ingredients in different formations with different flavors,
different barcodes.
Yeah. So it's really simple. So I love this satiety part too, because it really comes together. Again, I'm putting this in the film. The big culmination is putting everything we've learned throughout the film on one big graph, on one chart, or all the foods, and then you can change the labels of the graph and it stays the same, right? That's how you know everything lines up. It's like, okay, well, what foods have the most nutrient density? It's like these foods at the top, the sad, sugar, flour, oil at the bottom. What has the most satiety? Same thing. Good foods at the top, bad foods at the bottom. What is have the longest shelf life? Well, the sad three, sugar, flour, oil, has the longest shelf life. That's what you don't want. Everything really lines up. When were they introduced into our diet? Well, these newest foods are the worst foods, and the ones that we've been eating forever, like the organ meats and the bone marrow and the meat and this and that and different, little herbs we could pick off trees and fruits. Okay, so satiety and nutrient density.
So to touch on that, where's my funky chart? But basically, I've got a chart here.
This is a very visual podcast, by the way. We're scrolling through images. Sorry for people listening.
You made me do it. But if you look at, the combination of fat and carbs, they basically come together over the last 100 years. Carbs have dropped in terms of percentage, and fat has increased in percentage terms as people have extracted more oil from seeds, and they come to a similar sort of percentage amount. And over the last 50 years, you can see the carbs have increased and the fat has increased, and that's contributed to the calorie increase, which aligns perfectly with our obesity epidemic. So this is just the smoking gun that it's not the fat or the carbs, it's the fat and carbs together with very little change in protein intake, and we're all fat, diseased, and diabetic.
It's and it's the refined versions of those too. Right? That's why they've increased so much. Like you said, the seed oils, it's a highly refined, cheap thing that slips into all the foods, and then the carb version of that is the sugar and the flour and grains. And I mean, that's the real problem. And in another graph, the protein actually goes down. This one, probably the protein goes up. It depends on how you slice the data. But just because we're eating more, I think, the protein's gone up just because people are just eating too much. We just know people are eating more and more and more each year. But when you look at it, I don't know which graph.
In percentage terms, the protein is sort of going down a little bit.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. We went from 15 to about 12.5% on average. So, yes, the protein percentage went down. So, well, okay, so satiety. Let's get into that. Ted I've stolen so many things from him. So I feel happy that I contribute a little bit, I think. Because when a year and a half ago, I saw him up in Seattle for Thanksgiving, and I pitched him this idea of the satiety per calorie. And I was telling him, I was like, don't tell anyone. But and it's like it's so close to what we already talk about, but just putting it, and I did it in a couple of presentations. I was trying to keep it on the down low because I have a book that I was going to put this all into, but the different foods have different satiety and the satiety to calorie ratio. And if you eat foods that, if they match, if the satiety matches calories, basically. So my idea is that all whole foods, the satiety matches calories, right? If that makes sense. It's like you have a satiety level, you have a calorie level. So it's like an oyster. It's like not that many calories, but it has the right amount of satiety. Steak, anything, a potato is pretty satiating because it matches the calories. Then once you start refining the food down and changing it, it has the satiety doesn't match the calories. And the worst version of this that kind of proves it out is soda, right? So it has all the calories, but none of the satiety, right? So that's the worst version, the most extreme extraction and of it's just sugar water that doesn't fill you up. So I think that's why people say, oh, you eat Chinese food and you're hungry 3 hours or 2 hours later, whatever, 1 hour later, because it's just a bunch of noodles and, not that much meat. So I'm really into the satiety per calorie thing. And I guess it's good that because I probably stole it from Ted anyway, but then I guess I'm glad I told him about it. But it sounds like you're kind of in that same camp.
Yeah, definitely. It's
like
all
the
about
satiety per calorie type of thing.
Totally about satiety per calorie. I'll just share the screen again for the people. Sorry for the people listening in through the audio only, but yeah, we did this analysis you mentioned before of 500,000 days of MyFitnessPal data and plotted percentage carb intake versus satiety and hunger. So the people that ate the most based on their target goal. So MyFitnessPal, they put in I want to eat this much, and we looked at how much they actually ate versus how much they wanted to eat. And you can see there's really nice peaking here in the middle of, when you're between 40 and 50% carbs with the rest made up of fat, which is the croissant, donut, cookies, milk, chocolate, you're going to overeat those foods. And like you mentioned, potato, rice, these really low-fat foods, if you get over 60% carbs, you really struggle to overeat those foods. How many how many potatoes you're going to eat over a week. You're not going to overeat those, or just plain rice. But when you combine it with the fat as well, it just becomes this unnatural, hyperpalatable food that never occurred in nature other than maybe in autumn leading up to winter. So you could eat a whole lot more and overeat it. So yeah, I think this chart here is really, really powerful to understand. It's these hyperpalatable carb plus fat, low protein foods that drive us to overeat.
Absolutely. It's everything combined. It's the hyperpalatable nature of them. And that's not really found in nature. And like you said, yes, it would only be found in certain times of year when we need to fatten up for winter. If there's a whole bunch of berries, that are in season, plus have fatter animals, and then we combine and we eat more, and it worked until we had modern society. Then it doesn't work.
That brought both
and it combines the
together.
low.
You could never do that before.
Yeah, so it's a miracle of innovation and modernization, right? But now it's screwing us. And so it's a combination of, it tastes really great, it's highly rewarding, we're wired to eat these foods, and they're low in protein, and they're very low protein to energy ratio, and you can eat them forever. And you can eat a bag of chips. It's like, when do you stop? There's no stopping, because there's not much protein in there. It's just fat and carbs.
Yeah.
But you eat something with protein, you'll stop.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at this is the frequency distribution of that carb intake, and just the massive dominant amount of carbs people are eating is that 40 to 50% that they just tend to easily overeat. And some people try to go plant-based, vegan, whole food without any oil, but they just tend to gravitate back to that center zone and the very low carb, high fat approach. A lot of people just tend to gravitate back. So if you get less than 30% carbohydrate or greater than 60% carbohydrate, you tend to get a reasonable level of satiety, because it's really hard to overeat those foods, because they either fill your fat fuel tank or your carb fuel tank. But if you're filling both at the same time, you can just keep filling both tanks, and it takes a lot more energy before you get a full signal from one or the other if you're eating those combo foods.
Yeah, this is really important. And this is the stuff I talk about too, that Denise Minger talks about, or tipped me off on, is either camp on either extreme side, you can do pretty well, right? And it's because you're not mixing these hyperpalatable combination, and you're not mixing your fuel sources. And so I always say, I think one is better though. There's an optimal version, and it's towards the fat side for many reasons. And these foods the foods that have naturally a high amount of protein come with the fat.
Correct.
This is meat. This is
totally
what humans eat. And yes, you can. I'm not denying that people can lose weight on a plant-based diet, but you're doing it the wrong way. This is kind of this hack of nature that you're going low protein and you're not getting enough fat. And you have the satiety of just tons of carbs or whole foods, and it can produce weight loss.
Yeah, we definitely.
But it doesn't mean it's optimal.
We definitely see protein aligns with greater nutrient density. I've got a chart here I'll share. But we did analysis of our 2,000 recipes that we've been analyzing for the books, and you see as protein increases, nutrient density increases to about 50%. If you go really, really high protein, over 50%, you don't get any additional benefit, and it may be less nutrient dense as you get over 50%. But who's living on 50% protein? Most people can't do it for very long. As you said, most people are, they've dropped from 15 to 12.5. And if they went from 15 to 20, that have massive improvements. And then if they stall out, you go from 20 to 25. And once that breaks, you go from 25 to 30. And we definitely see now masterclasses, the people getting the best results in terms of satiety are getting over 40 to 50% protein. But that's not a long-term viable approach. It's just till you lose the body fat, and then you add back the energy from fat and or carbs back into your diet to maintain your weight.
But And it makes sense because your body has all the fat it needs. It has all the energy it needs while you're overweight. So yes, you eat the high protein temporarily. Your body can use its own fat for its fuel source. Yep. Then you get back down to your ideal body composition, and then now you can eat outside sources of energy. It's very simple. And that chart, if you go back up, I think maybe we could talk about the nutrient leverage hypothesis, because that's it's very tied in. So the protein leverage hypothesis, we went through, but nutrient, they come together. Yeah. They're packaged together. And I think that the nutrient leverage is just adds a little bit more to the puzzle, because you have a lot of data from from the MyFitnessPal and the nutrient optimizers showing that the more nutrients people get, the less they eat.
Yeah, definitely. And the strongest one is sodium, but also the other minerals are really, really important. The sodium, potassium, magnesium are really important. We see a similar sort of increase in satiety as people get more of those per calorie. So you see here for sodium, once you get over 4 or 5 grams per 2,000 calories, you tend to taper off your appetite. Potassium's got a really strong response. So if you get 4 to 5, 6 grams of potassium per 2,000 calories, you get increased satiety. So the vertical axis here is calorie intake divided by basal metabolic rate for the 40,000 days of chronometer data that we got into Nutrient Optimizer. And we just ran the analysis for all of the micronutrients. You see selenium here sort of tapers off nicely once you get enough selenium. Calcium is the same. So I suppose I really like the idea that the terminology of nutrient leverage hypothesis, because it's not just about protein. Definitely getting enough amino acids is amino acids are the first port of call. But once you've got enough protein, you then go, okay, what other nutrients am I missing in my diet, and how do I chase those down? What foods and meals do I need to chase to get those nutrients? Because if you don't get enough you're eating a lot of protein, but you're not getting enough sodium or potassium or magnesium, your body still craves more food and will keep seeking out more food until it gets those nutrients that it really requires to thrive, because they're all essential nutrients.
It's so important. I love it. It's weird though with satiety, and it seems like it's hard to measure. So you've measured it with all these different ways of cutting the data. But it doesn't seem it's like accepted in science, because it kind of is this soft thing, like, are you hungry or are you not?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how do you measure it? I mean, I do have a study in mind, but I want to know what you think, where we're at with this in the literature and stuff, and how can we measure it?
Yeah, there's really not a lot of data or studies being done on it, given how incredibly important it is to actually understand what is it about the food we eat that enables us to eat less of it. It's like, that's the obvious question of nutrition, isn't it? Why aren't we throwing a whole lot more research into that? There was the Satiety Index from the University of Sydney back in the late 80s that looked at what people ate the most of and versus the least of. And like the cooked and cooled potato was really hard to overeat, and the junk food was really easy to overeat, as you would expect. But with only 28 data points, it's like, what the hell do you do with that data? So that's why we went out and looked at the MyFitnessPal data, which has got the macronutrient data. But then once we got enough chronometer data into Nutrient Optimizer, we said, hey, we can look at it from a micronutrient perspective and look at how much of each of the micronutrients align with greater satiety that are actually available from food without having to supplement. So yeah, it's I think the most important question in nutrition.
I think it's the only question. I don't know why people aren't talking about it. It's like, over time, like long term, it's all that matters, right? I'm always like, yes, I get it. There's a potato hack. We talked about how satiating potatoes are. You're not allowed to eat salt or butter on it. Yes, of course you're going to lose weight. It's low protein. Who cares? You're still going to lose weight. You're going to lose muscle mass. But you're not disproving anything. You're not proving anything. All you're saying is that, yes, people can restrict calories in the short term and lose fat. I get it. Or muscle and fat.
Yeah, which is not good.
What the real question is, long term and in the real world. So you talked about the real world is what matters earlier in this show. That's what matters. And what matters is satiety. You can't white knuckle your way through these bad diets, like these stupid old ideas of juice fasts and rice crackers and salads with no dressing. It's not going to work long term. It does. It's absurd. So it's the only question we should say. So why do people eat more than other people? Or why do different foods produce different? It's because different foods have different calorie to satiety ratios. And I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to keep talking about it, I guess, on every podcast, and I'll put it in my film, and I'll try to write a book, and no one will listen to me. And then the government's just going to tell you to eat fake Impossible burgers.
Yeah, and there's plenty of motivation for people not wanting to look at, what's actually in the food you're eating. Are you getting the nutrients in the food you're eating? Because everybody who's funding all the research doesn't want you to look at the actual food and then the nutrients in the food you're eating, because it's declined massively over the last 50 years as we've taken the same plots of land, thrown some chemical fertilizers based on fossil fuels, which never would have been possible until 100 years ago, thrown a bit of extra maybe nitrogen in there to make the plants grow, and just churn the same soil over and over and over again, and it just gets more and more nutrient depleted as you have 3 crops harvested from that same plot of land every year. And it's no wonder we're nutrient deficient when that's primarily what we're eating.
Yeah, and that's back to the Dorito effect. We kind of mentioned about all the fake flavorings that make it seem like it's nutrients. So I had the author on, and we talked about this, so people can find that episode. Mark Schatzker.
That's a work of genius. That's so insightful.
Yeah. He's really great. Yeah, go back and listen to that one. And yeah, so we have all these foods that don't have as many nutrients. We put the fake flavoring, it's like the Dorito on it, tricks our body and brain into thinking, oh, this tastes good. It must have a lot of nutrients, because in nature, throughout history, that was true. If something tasted really rich and what's that word, like that savory flavor, especially, right? Umami. That means that it has a lot in it. Either the umami flavor, but it's that savor. When you eat a steak and then now you eat a chicken breast and it tastes like nothing, it's because it doesn't have much in it, other than the protein. Yeah. So,
yeah, and those chickens aren't eating. What are the chickens eating? They're just getting a whole lot of processed grains that are nutrient poor. So if they were going around the yard eating the worms and the dirt and everything in there, they'd taste amazing, because they're feeding on amazing food that makes them healthy.
It's all connected. The highest level thing is we've just lost our way. And this is what I found in Africa. This is going to be my new thing, where I bring up Africa every podcast. It was a big thing in my life. So, but all the people eating natural foods, eating a natural way, or naturally healthy. And then the more you move away from that, so that you're talking about agricultural methods and fake fertilizers and everything we're talking about, is just moving away from natural foods and the way we used to eat. And it's pretty linear. You just get that much unhealthier.
Totally.
It's like, end of story. So yeah, but then you're talking about the food companies. Yeah, but you're talking about the food companies. So the food companies must know this, but they don't want you to know this, because they make a high profit margin, and they don't want you to know that the more processed they are, the less healthy they are. You know what? I won't mention the names, but I did a presentation. I spoke at this little conference, and it was sponsored by a food company. And I actually talked about this stuff and how the more the level of processing, the worse it gets. And they didn't put up my video. they didn't put it up. So I was like, okay. I see what you're doing. But okay, let's move on, because we could just keep going in circles on this stuff forever, because it's so clear to us. But it's not clear to that David Sinclair fellow. So we'll bring it back to him. He's into this low protein idea, like, let's not simulate mTOR, let's go plant-based, all this type of stuff. Wrote a very popular book, went on Joe Rogan's podcast, all this type of stuff, spreading this message. So why is this wrong?
Yeah, going back to, what do you want when you're 80? You want to be mobile, independent, be able to feed yourself, not be trapped in a chair in a nursing home, eating whatever cheap slop that they want to feed you. You want to be able to be mobile, wipe your own bum. You want to be, and to do that at 40, at our age, you need to be investing in lean muscle mass, which decreases between now and then. It's really hard if you're not investing in adequate muscle and strength now to be mobile and strong there. And I think they look at what happens in petri dishes and the mice and just extrapolate that to humans, and that's not necessarily correct. And when you look at people are afraid of mTOR and IGF-1, but if you look at, I'll share the screen again, but if you look at IGF-1, there's an optimal level, and Tommy Wood says, you're up one extreme, you're sick and diabetic because you've got too much growth, but if you're at the other end, you're falling over and breaking your hip and never get out of the nursing home again. So you need a balance. There's a balance to everything in nature. If you look at BMI, the fertility, the health rating, the attractiveness rating even is sort of at a moderate BMI of 20 to 25. If you're too skinny, you're going to be, lower fertility, lower health, lower attractiveness. But if you're obese, that doesn't look healthy to us either. So it's not a good look. And I think from an mTOR point of view, you've got the same phenomenon. You don't want to be a mass monster. You don't want to be humongous and eating and injecting steroids and insulin to be the biggest, strongest thing you can unnaturally be. I don't think that's strong. That's healthy for the long term. But the fat-free muscle mass has got a really high correlation with longevity. So having adequate protein to live and survive in the real world is really critical. So if I was going to bet, what we know about living for a long, healthy life in humans, it's about being healthy, reasonably lean, and reasonably strong. It's not going to the extreme, but it's not going to the lower extreme where you're wasting away your muscle and you don't care about feeling vital and reproductive and having great hormones. I think once you get to that point, you've your chance of living a long, healthy life. It may be long, it may be longer, but it's not going to be a happy, healthy health span at that point.
It's all about the health span. Yeah, it's all the balance, the U-shaped curve. If people aren't looking at this, we're showing a lot of more U-shaped curves. And you want that sweet spot. And it's a balance of, and I'm not saying eat a balanced diet. See, that's the problem is people say eat a balanced diet. And it's like, what no, I hate that.
That just often just means fat and carbs together, which is the formula for junk food.
Well, in the past 30 years, it means eat orange juice and low-fat milk and cereal. Eat your balanced breakfast. No, that's not it. You're back at the IGF-1 graph. These are these growth signals, mTOR and IGF-1. These are growth signals. And you want some growth signals at some part of your life or your day, and you don't want them. So to get more detailed on this, and I've covered this in other podcasts, but I want to just always cover things multiple times and just get deeper in the discussion, right? And you don't want to constantly be stimulating mTOR and IGF-1. And these muscle-bound bodybuilders, they're doing it. They kind of know it. It's not like they think they're going to live forever doing this. They're trying to win this competition. And they're eating 6 times a day, waking up in the middle of the night, eating boluses of protein, spiking their mTOR, their IGF-1. They're doing it on purpose to get huge, like this photo. But
and they know it's not healthy. They know the steroid injection is not healthy, but they want to win on stage, and they're compromising their health to do that. But the opposite extreme is not optimal at all.
Well, you don't want to be wasting away. This was going to say too, the health span. You don't want to, is life worth living if you're in a bed, you can't move, you can't do anything, but you live to 105? How about I live to 100 even, but I'm strong and I'm robust and I have muscle. And I mean, I don't even know if it's proven. Maybe you could live to 110 and be strong and robust and muscled, who knows? So I just know I don't want to be withering away like a lot of these people are when they're not getting enough protein and they're not stimulating the mTOR enough.
Yeah. I think to go back to the point before, it's not about eating more protein, because if you eat more protein, it often comes with more fat. You've got to think in terms of higher percentage protein, which is, maybe a little bit more actual quantity of protein in grams, but you're dialing back the fat and the carbs. And at that point, you get satiation and you stop trying to restrict food because your body just says, I've had enough and I don't need to eat all day, all the time.
Well, speaking of bodybuilders, that's the way they cut. So you eat, you lower fat and carbs at the same time.
Yeah, basically a protein very modified fast
protein.
where they drive protein up to 40, 50%, even 60%, which is insane. It's hard to do. And that's why we don't all look like shredded 5% body fat bodybuilders. Is, rabbit starvation isn't a thing in the Western world where we've got 7-Elevens and donuts in every corner, because it's really, really hard to just eat really high protein because your body just starts to crave the energy from the fat and the carbs.
Yes. And with the mTOR, again, I brought this up in multiple podcasts, but you want this balance of the growth mode and the longevity mode. I'm calling it. The growth mode, you want it sometimes a day, and longevity mode, you want for most of the day. And so I like to say, I'm going to work out. I'm going to do my workout in the evening, and then I'm going to eat some protein and carbs and spike my mTOR. I'm going to have, you know what I mean? I'll eat some carbs. I'll eat some too much protein, not too much, and I'm good. And then for the rest of the day, at night, I'm not spiking my mTOR. I'm not spiking IGF-1. I'm either fasting, or I'm like, my lunches are usually high fat keto type meals, right? So my blood sugar is staying stable all day. So it's I don't eat any calories in the morning. I have my lunch, like keto lunch, high fat with good protein, not too much. And then I work out and I eat more protein and some carbs, and I'm amazing. I feel fantastic, and I'm maintaining muscle, and I can gain muscle, but I'm only stimulating once a day. So in comparison, these David Sinclair guys, they're talking about, oh, well, you got to eat 5 times a day, and we're going to eat plant-based and all this type of stuff. Well, these carbs stimulate these things as well. Carbs are stimulating IGF-1. So maybe you could just go into like just the frequency that these people, it's just kind of ironic that they're telling us not to eat all this meat. But usually people who eat meat-based diets only eat 1 to 2 times a day.
I really liked what you mentioned there about I eat, low carb in the morning or my first meal, and then low fat in my second meal. And that goes back to the satiety plot we had before. You're jumping from one extreme to the other. You're never combining fat and carbs together. And if, I don't know if you know Sian Foley, he's fascinating with Don't Eat for Winter, and he just did an amazing bodybuilder show at 45, getting ripped by just oscillating between one extreme or the other. Throughout the day, you can still get your carbohydrates, you still get heaps of protein at both meals, and you can have a wider variety of foods, tastes, and nutrients if you're not just going low carb or low fat, you're sort of alternating. But I think to do that, you've got to basically deplete your blood sugars before you refill it, because if you're filling your blood sugar fuel tank while you've still got the fat floating around and your fat stores are full, then you're going to have that combination in your body that is dangerous, and that's where we get all the bad cholesterol. And when you get basically sugar and glucose and fat mixed together in your blood at the same time, that's where we get into major troubles.
Well, that's how most people eat in every meal
all the time,
and they're eating 3 to 5 mixed meals, high carb, high fat, kind of probably low protein, and they're getting both fuel sources, and their body's always in disarray and havoc. And yes, so I know his book is called Don't Eat for Winter. I read it, good stuff. But he's talking about being very metabolically flexible, actually, because you can go back to each fuel. But yes, waiting enough time, so he's not constantly eating, right? It's like you give enough time for your body to kind of clear out the last fuel source.
Yeah, I think that's really, really an important concept. And really metabolic flexibility is not having both fuel tanks full at the same time. So when you eat, you've got room to store that energy and it doesn't back up. And if it backs up, you're going to have to burn off the carbs first. You're going to be burning off glucose due to oxidative priority because you really have limited room to store it while the fat is pushed into storage. So if you eat fat and carbs together, that's where you end up. You just over fuel supply and burning carbs all the time.
Yeah. And I'll say I do a little bit different from him. So I'm not eating tons of carbs. I'm also not trying to bodybuild at all. I don't even have a gym. LA is still closed.
Oh,
it's
wow.
insane. And I can't even get into my little apartment gym even. And this is my sort of longevity plan, like how to have the longest health span for me and lifespan would be this idea of a keto lunch and just like a higher protein, still pretty high fat, but some carbs for dinner. So anyway, it's not that important. I just wanted to, so there's a bit of difference.
Yeah, I think it depends on how active you actually are. If you're really, really active, then maybe you need a bit of extra carbs to support, but most people can get all the glucose they need from the protein they eat because they're not really that active and they don't need glucose to be supplied really quickly.
Yes. And I want to bring this up too. I'm glad you brought the oxidative priority stuff because a lot of people don't understand how some people can eat high carb and are athletes and how it works. But it's really, you're just burning off the energy. Well, and then, okay, maybe you can kind of explain it more and why low carb diets work and high carb diets can work.
Yeah.
Right.
This is,
you're gonna pull up a graph.
Yeah, this is my favorite graphics at the moment, and just to explain that fuel tank concept more. I mean, this is like our blood glucose, liver glycogen, the fatty acids in our blood, and then our body fat. But from an oxidative priority, you see a bit of a pipe feeding down. So basically, you have to burn the glucose first in your blood before you can burn the glycogen in your liver. And then you can access the free fatty acids. So if you go on a low carb diet, you basically deplete the glucose in your blood. But if you keep on filling up the fat in your blood, then you still can't get to your body fat because you're still eating heaps and heaps of dietary fat. But if you go to the other extreme and go high carb, low fat, you're only filling one fuel tank and you've got a better chance of accessing that body fat. But really the best approach is to dial back fat and carbs at the same time with still adequate nutrients, adequate protein, and then you can draw down on the blood glucose and the fat in your blood so you can access your body fat. So I think that's been a paradigm shift for me to understand that if to draw down on your body fat, you need a sustainable way to dial back the fat and the carbs at the same time in your diet.
It's beautiful. I'm going to have to clip this out maybe for people who aren't watching it because it's very visual, but it's awesome because you see that even the sizes of these fuel tanks are kind of accurate to how it works. And your blood glucose tank is very small, and then your liver and muscle glycogen has a bigger reservoir and the fatty acids. And you want to get through those first three layers to your body fat, right? Everyone's goal, if you're losing weight, is to lose body fat, but you have to tap into it and you have to get through these sources before you can start tapping into it. And so, yes, that's why people joke around and call them butter chuggers, right? These keto people that think that as long as I'm not raising my insulin, I can't gain weight. That's not true. Tons and tons of people gain weight from keto diets.
Yeah, definitely. The last 5 years of keto have taught us all a lot from the people who have the diehard believers that think they can eat unlimited fat, and I was one of them. So you're thinking, going to stabilize my insulin, keep my blood sugars low, and everything will be good. But all of a sudden, you look in the mirror and go, I'm fatter, and I don't think that's good for my health. So
Well, I'm glad you also said that while getting adequate protein and nutrients. So this goes back to why you can't just do these stupid calorie restriction diets because they don't discern between getting the adequate protein and nutrients. They're just like, eat the same foods, but less of them. That's absurd.
And very
absurd.
Quickly,
just think about it.
Just go out and find the donuts and the chips as soon as you let off the brake, because your lizard brain is going, I need to survive, I need to go out and seek food. But if you give it what it needs when it needs it, with adequate protein, vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids without excess energy, which is nutrient density, then you get satiety, and then everything flows. So everybody talks about we need to avoid insulin toxicity, but insulin toxicity is just the downstream effect of energy toxicity. So to address insulin toxicity, you need to actually attack the energy toxicity, because insulin is just the hormone that stops your body from completely disintegrating. If my wife stopped injecting insulin, all her stored energy would just flow into her blood, and she'd pee it out and get really thirsty, and it should be dead in a few days. So insulin is critical to decrease the amount of insulin your body requires to pump out. You need to dial in your body composition and not be so fat, is the bottom line.
And how to do that, this is the key to everything. The key to everything is how to dial down your body. How can I eat less calories so I can tap into my excess body fat while still having adequate nutrition and satiety? And that's kind of what you do. Yeah. That's what you do for a living with your optimizing nutrition stuff. And you show all these different diets and how to do it. So it's like, how can I maximize my nutrient density so that I get those things while not eating too much energy, right? How can I... This is all revolving around the same concepts of, I
don't know what people aren't getting on board with, how do I get the nutrients I need without too much energy? It's like, this is where it's at. But it's not just protein. It's about all the nutrients all at the same time.
Well, maybe you could show just some of your charts on like the most nutrient dense foods compared to this foods, or you kind of have a lot of these different foods.
Yeah, I suppose we've got a bunch of recipe books that we're working on at the moment, from different extremes, from, I want to be an athlete and bulking, or a bodybuilder, to fat loss. Maybe I could go through...
Well, just even, there's one. Just one of these charts is just interesting to kind of, you're compiling a whole bunch of different foods, and then you're looking at the nutrients.
Yeah, so I think this is really important. This is from our maximum nutrient density book. And this is on the bottom axis is the optimal nutrient intake per 2,000 calories. So you can see on the bottom, it's really, really, really easy to get vitamin A, but at the top, it's a bit harder to get thiamine, calcium, zinc. So your focus should be not on getting the nutrients you're getting heaps of. It's about getting which foods and meals contain more of the nutrients I'm struggling to get more of at the moment. So this is probably the best picture. We've got a nutrient quality score of 83% for this. This is our little system we devised. But as you go down, you've got different protein to energy. If you just only focus on protein, it's still amazing, but not quite as good. If you look at nutritional keto, you've got less,
which is nutrients. Very high fat nutritional ketosis.
Yeah, you've got less nutrients per calorie because you've got so much energy from fat. If you go down to therapeutic keto, it's got even less.
Sorry,
which
that's
is
the one that's
very, very high fat. Then plant-based, you can see vitamin B2, selenium, omega-3 are really hard to get on a purely plant-based diet. So you need to think about what am I eating now, how am I eating, and what meals do I need to prioritize to get more of those, and then my body will, my lizard brain will settle down because it's getting what it needs.
Yeah, this is something that few people talk about. It's the hard to get nutrients, and a lot of them are from just the most nutrient dense animal foods, like the liver or the oysters and stuff like that have some of these weirder, not weirder, but just harder to get nutrients like zinc and stuff like that.
So if you look at, if you want to be an athlete and bulk up, then you don't want that same level of nutrient density because it's so satiating, and you actually want more fuel to fuel your activity. But the vast majority of us aren't actually doing that much activity and need more energy.
That's an interesting one. Yeah. Some people, it's funny because people message me a lot that are actually trying to put on weight, and they're saying, "Hey, man, I just call it sapien diet, which is kind of like all your stuff combined, right? It's any good diet stuff combined, right? It's like a framework.
Yeah.
It's not one dietary pattern, but it's like it's so satiating. I'm so full, I can't eat enough.
That's why you add more fat and or carbs, and you get the energy you need because the protein, the nutrients are really satiating, and you will fade away if that's all you got to eat. So once you get to your goal weight, you then add back the energy.
Yep, that's what I tell people. So, okay. Oh, actually, insulin would be good. We're talking about your wife, and you can learn from a type 1 diabetic. And there's the difference between basal insulin and then insulin spikes from food. And I'd love to just kind of go into that a little more because I think it's really important. Yeah. And I think, a lot of people have these questions about it because in our community, I don't even know what our community is, but in, say, the keto community, which isn't necessarily our community, people think that no matter what, if you're eating carbs, it's bad because you're spiking insulin. But there's there's a lot of different things going on. And also the difference between refined carbs and whole food carbs.
Yeah. Where do I start? I'll just bring up my
I didn't prep you for all this.
No.
I'm kind of just throwing it at you.
A million posts, but I suppose what does insulin do? Most people think of it as the anabolic hormone that makes your muscles grow and takes in energy into your cells to allow it to be used. But really the dominant role is just holding your body together and not disintegrating. So as I said before, if the wife stopped taking insulin, blood sugars would rise, fat would rise in her blood, ketones would rise in her blood, and should be diabetic ketoacidosis and dead before too long without insulin. So the major role of insulin is really it's like the brake on your liver to stop energy being released from your liver into your bloodstream while you're still eating the food that you're eating. So really the way to reduce your requirement for basal insulin is to find a way, again, to eat less without suffering malnutrition. So bodybuilders will inject insulin to grow bigger, which is, again, we talked about before, you're pushing it too hard and they even know it's not healthy. And I really like this image that we created with Ted, and really your insulin is like the dam wall that's holding your energy and storage, and as you eat less, the dam wall lowers and allows your energy to flow out of storage, and it's the insulin that controls that. So the way to, again, reduce your basal insulin requirement, which for a low carb person is like 80% of your daily insulin requirements, is to just find a way to eat that's more satiating without worrying about the short-term fluctuations of insulin and blood sugar, but to target the satiety across the day and say, how do I eat less energy while still getting the nutrients I need so my body will be satiated and not go out and seek more food?
And how to do that practically is not eat refined carbs and sugar and refined oil.
You sound like a broken record, Brian.
I know. It's all connected, though. We're just saying the same thing
over
100 different ways.
Yeah.
But you got to hear it from all sides. Think about it from all sides.
Yeah.
And then it finally clicks. I mean, I'm still interested in this stuff. I could say it over and over again, even though I've been, you and I have been doing this, I don't know, 5 years. I don't know if you've been doing it longer than me, but it is, it's just still interesting.
Yeah.
So what is this here?
This chart shows BMI versus insulin secretion across the day. And basically, the fatter you are, the more insulin your pancreas is pumping out. So that's the smoking gun. You don't want to just reduce insulin spikes after meals. You want to find a way to reduce your insulin by reducing your body fat. So the number one target is your body fat, by eating less while still getting nutrients.
That's a little bit of like circular logic for people, kind of, but maybe you could go into the personal fat threshold too, because that was there. I saw that on the last slide with Ted's video, but
So
Just,
yeah, interesting. So segue to personal fat threshold. Basically, your adipose tissue has a limited amount of storage, like a sponge. So you get to a point where your adipose tissue is overfilled, and then it starts to overflow. The energy starts to overflow back into your bloodstream. So you end up with high glucose and free fatty acids and ketones in your bloodstream. And then the insulin kicks in and then starts to store that energy around your vital organs. So then you really get into trouble where you get fatty liver, fat around your heart, brain, whatever, all the bad places you don't want excess fat to be stored. But the personal fat threshold is basically the concept that different people reach that personal fat threshold level at different levels of body fat. So some people can put on a lot more weight before that overflow, that spillover occurs, and typically Southeast Asians and some people, due to different factors, reach the personal fat threshold and become diabetic at lower levels of body fat. So it's a matter of really checking your blood sugar and understanding, are my stores over full? And if your blood sugars are elevated, then it's a real warning sign to start to dial it back. You can still avoid the worst of the complications. You can be metabolically healthy, obese, and the people that have to crane out of their homes, my 500-pound life people are potentially remain insulin sensitive for longer, and they may actually struggle with body weight more because once you exceed your personal fat threshold, your fat stores tap out, and it's harder to continue to gain weight. You still can, but it's harder. But the people get really big, potentially remain insulin sensitive for a lot longer.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept because they keep creating more fat cells, then there's just more place to put the energy. But some people, like you said, Southeast Asians, and certain people can be thin and appear kind of thin, but they still have problems. And these countries still have a lot of stroke and heart disease and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, it could be stored in visceral fat, right? That you can't really see. Or some of these people, they're kind of thin. They look a little bit under muscled, kind of thin, and then have like a little pooch in the belly area or something, you know?
Yeah. And that low muscle situation with high body fat is the really risky point to be. And that's where I think a lot of the plant-based vegans end up, because they're just eating the fat and carbs with low protein, and they may be potentially leaner, but their body composition is non-optimal and potentially end up with diabetes earlier.
Well, Dr. Sean O'Mara did, MRI scans of that type of person, and they had tons of visceral fat. They were so excited that they're vegan, they're so healthy, and had one of the most visceral fats he's ever seen. So
yeah, wow.
That's a good warning there. So here's a question that kind of relates to what we're talking about. Why are obese people still hungry when they have so much energy stored in their body?
Yeah, it's basically what they're eating. They're just still craving the protein and nutrients from food. So, and if you, going back to don't eat for winter, if you're eating that fat carb combo, it basically sends a signal to your lizard brain to eat more to prepare for winter, to gain fat, to store energy. So if you change what you're eating, I mean, if you look at it from a seasonal, cyclical point of view, you've got the autumn where there's the fat and carbs together. You got winter, which is sort of a low carb keto thing where you've got plenty of protein. Then you move into spring, and you've got the lean meat, lean animals, and fiber, where the body says, okay, summer's coming, you need to shed all that excess weight. You're in a protein sparing modified fast, and then you've got carbs in summer, and then autumn comes around again. And in nature, we would have continued to cycle, but we're stuck in that carb plus fat autumnal, hyper autumnal stage where we just keep eating because I think to some extent there's a signal in our biology that says it's time to eat and get fat. If you look at it from a Stephen Guyenet dopamine perspective, it's the carbs and fat that separately provide a dopamine hit because it gives you energy. And there's plenty of studies that show that once you eat carbs and fat together, you just get this massive dopamine spike, and it just reinforces continually eating those foods. So you have to change what you're eating to calm your lizard brain to the point that you don't want to keep eating anymore.
I think that's the key to it, because I'm even talking about the mechanisms at a smaller level of these people they have all the fat in their body, but their body can't use it, right? Their body can't liberate the free fatty acids, they will be from their fat cells to use them as energy. And it's because what they eat, I guess. That was a good explanation, but it comes down to what you eat. And if you continue to eat like the processed carbs or fats and rewarding foods, I mean, maybe you could talk more about on a mechanistic level that you're just never able to use that energy.
Yeah, I mean, people in the keto low carb world would say it's because you're eating carbs and insulin, but really if you look at the insulin response to those fat carb foods, that's the massive insulin response. If you watch my wife's blood sugars, which I do a lot, and occasionally she has to go out and she can't choose the foods, and if she has whatever it is that happens to be a combo of fat and carbs together, her blood sugar and insulin are elevated for like 36 hours, and the insulin pump is hammering with insulin to try and get it back down. But that insulin is a response to the food she's eating. It's not because she ate carbs that caused a short-term bump. I mean, you could eat potato or broccoli or sweet potato or rice by itself, and you'd really struggle to overeat that to a point that it caused that same level of insulin response. It's the long-term ability to eat a whole lot of energy that overfills your energy stores that requires a lot of energy. So I think that's where we sometimes get it back to front. And I know 5 years ago I did, when I was listening to everybody in the keto world. And yeah, it's the overconsumption that fat and carb combo allows that drives insulin. It's not the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that, because some of these high carb or plant-based advocates, they are right in a sense that, yes, if you just eat, if you go lower fat, you can have the same effects. Like you're saying, you're both sides are kind of right, because they're saying the same thing. They're saying don't eat both energy sources at the same time and end up too much of them.
Yeah, there's a Mastering Diabetes guys, Cyrus and Robbie, that I've probably got a little bit more sympathy for now than I did 3 years ago, but they understand that as well, that if you're at one extreme or the other, then you're going to struggle to overeat those foods. Your insulin requirements are going to be lower. You're on a high carb, low fat diet, your blood sugars are going to be much more erratic. And I don't know, I'd much prefer to be on a low carb diet if I had type 1 diabetes. But you can still achieve a reasonable level of satiety, reasonable HbA1c, and lower insulin requirements across the day, because you're not able to overeat because you're sticking to one extreme or the other.
And you're getting all the good fat soluble vitamins from animal foods and all that stuff. So, all right, this dog, I'm taking care of a dog that's going nuts. Sorry. That wasn't my dog on the bed earlier. And I wanted to ask about anti-nutrients, because you have like a very inclusive approach, right? And you're just looking at the science. Okay, this is what the nutrients are in these certain foods, and this is, whatever. Some people listening are like, well, I can't eat that, or I have a problem with nightshades, or so what's going on there?
Yeah. I mean, fairly close to home, my wife is type 1 diabetic, which comes with a whole lot of autoimmune issues, and she's definitely got issues with too much eggs or massive amounts of spinach or tomatoes and histamines, and so she knows she has to avoid those foods. But not everybody is in that situation, and with the masterclasses we just say, how much of that food that may have nutrients can you tolerate without symptoms? And I think that's a very individual thing. And I mean, we're currently working through a whole range of different specialized recipe books for low oxalate, low histamine, low FODMAP, et cetera, and there's definitely people who can't tolerate those, but by limiting your availability of foods, you definitely limit the nutrients you can actually get from those foods. So things you want to avoid anti-nutrients, lectins, phytic acids, oxalates, tannins, that can interfere with the absorption of iron, magnesium, potassium. At lower levels, they may provide sort of a hormetic stress, which is beneficial. But if you can't tolerate that high level of stress, you may be in trouble. But a lot of the ones that people struggle with the most are those grains and that contain all the lectins. Down in the bottom left corner again of low nutrient density, low satiety, and most people struggle to overeat the green veggies. But there's a limit to how much spinach you can eat, and it's probably a limit from, some people probably can't tolerate that level of oxalates. So if you have issues with eating that much green veg, then back off. And most people find an optimal amount that might look like a solid amount of plant-based foods on the plate, but from a calorie point of view, it might be 60, 70, 80% animal or seafood based. So I suppose going back to the those charts, if you look at, I can't bring them up right now, but if you look at the charts with the nutrients at the top, if you know that you're struggling to get enough of those nutrients, and they're got low bioavailability, low absorption due to anti-nutrients, then yes, you need to be concerned. But if you're getting tons of vitamin A, it doesn't really matter necessarily where that's coming from, especially if you're on an omnivorous diet, because that, maybe half of that is bioavailable, but you're going to be getting heaps of it because there's heaps in your food at the same time. So it's sort of 0% of something that's, if you're getting nothing and it's 100% bioavailable, it's still nothing, So you have to look at your current diet and understand whether you really need to be concerned about bioavailability in your diet. So the first priority is really to try and maximize nutrient density of what you're eating, and then fine-tune it from there. But just to be afraid of anything and everything plant-based because it's evil and got bad things in it, I don't know. It may not be the optimal approach from a nutrient density perspective, which is also important.
Yes. And you want to be anti-fragile, for one thing. You want to strive and heal your body so that you can handle these foods. You're going to eat seasonally. That's another thing, right? You don't have to eat like pounds of spinach every day year round.
Yeah, totally.
That'd be bad.
Totally.
That'd be too much oxalate. But that's not how we ate throughout history.
And if you're getting a variety of foods, if you're just pounding the spinach or pounding the kale shakes, you're going to be in trouble, because if that's all you're eating, then you're not meant to eat that way. You're meant to hunt and gather and forage for a whole range of different foods all at the same time.
Yeah. So I don't eat many plant foods, but I do eat key plant foods, and I love them. And and there's also the preparation technique. I eat fermented plant foods, right? And it's kind of like a win-win.
Which makes them more bioavailable.
More bioavailable, less anti-nutrients. Tastes great to me. Maybe, probiotic effects, right? Some good stuff going on. So I guess I'm always trying to just push people to not restrict too much. Go the opposite direction. Is once you can heal, maybe everyone's on some kind of healing journey, but then let's add more foods in so we can be anti-fragile. We can still tolerate foods. We go out for a dinner party.
And my wife is fairly fragile. So, I've said, just have steak for lunch, and her blood sugars are amazing. And if she just breaks it back and just basically goes carnivore, that a lot of the autoimmune issues and histamine issues heal, and she does really well. But I think for people who have an extreme autoimmune issue, that may be a place they need to stay. But if they're able to heal themselves, then it's like, hey, what foods will contain the vitamins and minerals that I'm struggling to get on steak alone? Let's try that. How do I tolerate that now? Can I bring that back in so I get the nutrients I need, and I'm not completely fragile to the point that I get a whiff of flour and I keel over for a day? Because I think the microbiome can shrink to some degree to a point that you become very, very fragile, and you notice that effect even more after you've gone to that extreme. But yeah, it's a complex discussion, and we really don't know a lot about all that detail in the microbiome and how anti-nutrients react and be able to quantify it in a complex food system. We're just not there yet. So you really have to suck it and see. And if you can tolerate those foods, great. If you can't, then try to create the most nutrient-dense diet you can within the restrictions you want to put on your diet.
I love it. This is a good kind of wrap up. We'll wrap it up even more. Eat more protein if you want to lose weight. David Sinclair is wrong. Don't get caught up in this plant-based idea of mTOR and IGF being bad, but just don't spike it all the time. What else? What's other recaps here? Nutrient leverage.
Nutrient density, satisfy your brain.
Focus on nutrient density
with the nutrients it needs.
Well, we did it. Good stuff. Thanks for going through all your visuals. Check out his blog, optimizingnutrition.com with an S, because he's in Australia. He says optimizing with an S. Where else can people find you? And also you have these data-driven fasting and all your different master classes.
We've got Optimizing Nutrition. Got a book, Big Fat Keto Lies, which is sort of a compilation of the last 5 years of blogs looking at nutrition and where I think we've gone potentially wrong with the keto extreme and fear of insulin, fear of any blood sugar variability, and looking at that through the eyes of nutritional optimization. And we've created a masterclass for people who want to look at their food and dial in the macros and their micros to look at what foods and meals that they enjoy that they can sustain. And as you mentioned, we've got the data-driven fasting, which is a new little toy where people look at their blood sugars to understand whether they need to refuel now. And it's just been obscenely effective, which is really exciting. So we've got 760 people in a current group that we're running a challenge that's just completely thriving. Meanwhile, we're just finishing off the masterclass. So life has got busy.
That's awesome. Just do a couple more quick points on that data-driven fasting. It's really interesting to know. It's using your blood glucose as a gauge.
Yeah, right? So basically your blood sugar is the most responsive fuel gauge to what you're eating, and it's basically a response to extended fasting. A lot of people try to fast for longer and think fasting for longer is better, but I was driving down the highway the other day, forgot to refuel for a long time because I was busy and procrastinated, and all of a sudden I got to see 0 on my fuel gauge on the motorway, and I'm like, oh no. So I'm off the next ramp, rushed to the first service station, filled it up, didn't care what the price was. And it's sort of the same approach. When we get really hungry after fasting for a long time, we just eat anything and everything. And a lot of people will fast for 3 or 4 days and then just eat energy-dense, nutrient-poor food that leads them just to be on this constant long-term cycle. And because they're struggling to get enough protein when they eat, the satiety is really poor and the body composition fades away. So if we can combine just enough fasting to deplete your fuel in your bloodstream and then combine that with nutrient-dense eating when you do eat, you get a much better chance of actually making it sustainable, maintaining good body composition, and it's a really accurate way of knowing when you need to refuel, rather than calorie counting and outsourcing all your satiety signals to an app. So after a while, you get to the point where you can calibrate your hunger signals with your blood sugar and go, I really do need to eat now. And then you refuel, you fill up on quality satiating food and go again until you actually need to refuel again. So it's basically using your blood glucose as a fuel gauge, and over time your personalized trigger sort of drops and you chase a lower blood glucose trigger. So you wait a little bit longer to eat each time, and then body fat, waste, weight all just follow behind. So it's a really effective way of finding a negative energy balance without having to track your food.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Not having to track your food, and maybe you could do it in the beginning to learn, but not long term. So
yeah, definitely.
I love it. All right. Well, great stuff. OptimizingNutrition.com, and we'll see you again maybe in another year and a half, and we'll update.
That'd be great, man. It's been epic, and thanks for taking such a great interest and taking the journey with us and spreading the good news.
Absolutely. I love what you're doing.
Thanks.
I'll see you.
Thanks, dude. Keep in touch.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening, sharing with a friend, giving a review on iTunes. Go to sapien.org to check out our program and the tribe. Be part of the tribe. We have some lifetime memberships left. Also, nosethetail.org, where you can get the grass-fed beefs and other meats sent to you. Body care, back in stock. Seasonings, freshly ground. Biltong, extra handy, on the go. We got it all for you. Free shipping options, nosethetail.org. And that's about it. I'll catch you next week.